Look, it's manageable. Just shows, I think, just demonstrates what a challenge it is. The fact that the surplus is partly about the government's decisions about expenditure, but it's also affected by things like SOE profits, the impacts of the pre-Christmas earthquake in Christchurch. What I'm signalling today is that we think it's manageable, challenging but manageable, because we are keen to get to surplus in 2014-15.
Given the numbers you've outlined today of the $1 billion turnaround, how big is the surplus you're now able to forecast in 14-15? Is that the thing still marginal?
Look, it's we're not going to have a big surplus. If we can get to near surplus, somewhere around there, I think that'll be an achievement.
So you're talking about near surplus. Does that mean that there is a risk that you won't reach it?
We're determined to reach it, but the point is, when you've got a $70 billion budget, of course we'd like to have surpluses of $2 or $3 billion, but it won't be anything like that.
Is the zero budget $300 million in deficit or $300 million in surplus? Overall, it doesn't matter. It's more of a political goal now, isn't it, for you guys?
I think it's really just about determination and direction. In an economic sense, a few $100 million here or there over $70 billion budget is unimportant in the long term. But in the short term, I think it's important we reflect the public mood, which is that we should stop growing our overdraft and stop growing our debt. We're determined to do that.
Sorry, it's the zero budget. Is that the main response to these latest forecasts that you've got? Is it?
Well, we were working on a reasonably tight budget anyway. The forecasts show that it's important we achieve it, and it'll be a combination of revenue measures, closing down tax loopholes, most of which has been signalled before,
but is there anything,
as well as expenditure.
Is there anything more you need to do now, though, in terms of going further then with spending cuts?
Well, we've had a series of longer term commitments in place which we want to maintain. So we've said, as we've said today, no more changes to national super or working for families, maintaining early childhood entitlements. We've also said to the public sector what their revenues are going to be for the next 4 years, and we want to stick to that.
So if you're really serious about the fiscal position, particularly the long-term fiscal position, that you've got a message in there, why don't you look at interest-free student loans? Why don't you look at the age of super? Because they clearly are issues that cost a lot of money.
Well, we think in a growing economy, we can support the schemes which put cash in people's pockets, help maintain the standard of living. So that's the balance we've been trying to strike, to maintain those income support programs, protect the vulnerable, but get better value out of the government's money.
Does it mean you have to go for a zero budget or close to again next year if you're going to reach this target?
We've still got to consider exactly plans for future years, but we would expect to continue to have new spending over the next few years.
But you said that last year about this year, and it hasn't happened that way. It seems to me that the indicators are quite flat. So is that something you're going to have to look at again next year?
Well, if we ended up in a similar situation next year, then I suppose we would look at it. But we're reasonably confident about the economy.
Are you looking at
economy picking up?
Say postponing some of the things you plan to bring in that surplus year, like for example the auto enrolment, KiwiSaver, postpone that a year?
Well, there'll be details about all that sort of thing in the budget. I don't want to get into is it this, is it that. We're focusing on controlling expenditure pretty tightly this year, and that'll lead us through to a surplus in 2015.
Because the Brits have gone into recession, obviously, in the last 24 hours, technically as well. Does that make more of a chance that we could follow? Because the Prime Minister talked at the start of this year, if Europe was to go into some kind of recession, there'd be other perhaps measures come out of New Zealand as a result. Firstly, do you think we could slip into recession?
Well, some of the effects of what's going on in Europe and the UK are built into these forecasts. It's one of the reasons that it's turned around in the last 3 or 4 months. So we're forecasting lower revenue. Looking at over the next couple of years, one of the unique features for New Zealand is the Christchurch rebuild, because while the government's tightening up, we've got somewhere between $20 to $30 billion of mainly insurance company funding, which will come into the New Zealand economy. It'll be paying wages, building buildings, and that helps offset some of the constraining effects of the government tightening up.
So you don't think there's a chance that we could face a secondary recession?
No, we don't see that on the way the world is at the moment. I mean, if there's some dramatic meltdown in Europe, then all bets are off. So far, they've managed to avoid that.
Would it be fair to say that looking forward, when you do this review of the future spending, that you're going to have to pare back what I understand is 1.2 billion a year? Is that the number that's currently on the books for new spending over the next 2 years?
Yeah, we've allowed for more new spending next year and the year after. That's something that we'll make final decisions about through the budget. But
looks pretty unlikely, doesn't it? I mean, that 1.2 based on your speech today.
Well, we've said it's an issue that's there. We may well end up considering it.
Well, you said you're reviewing it. You're not reviewing it up, presumably.
No, we won't be reviewing it up. But we do expect to continue to take new initiatives and invest, in new technology and upfront spending and welfare reform to get people off benefit. Where things are going to work in the long term, we're willing to spend money. We don't want to remove all those options.
Will you make changes to student loans this budget?
There'll be a set of changes across a whole range of spending items. So there isn't one. We won't be looking at one big thing.
But student loans are going to be looked at, though.
Well, what we've said today is the National Super, Working for Families, early childhood subsidies, those things all remain in place. There will be tight spending and some savings across a range of programs, and I wouldn't want to prejudge that today.
But will there be some changes to the criteria and eligibility around student loans, I suppose, if I widen my question out a little?
Yeah, well, no, look, I don't want to get into which bits are which where. Those decisions have yet to be properly finalised.
Are they being looked at around student loans?
Well, as I've said, we're looking at a broad approach to making the kind of savings we need to make. But it'll be across the board.
It'd be easy to send a signal that student loans aren't going to be touched, though, will it, today? So a month out from the budget.
Well, as I said, we don't want to get into a game of what's on and what's off. We're looking at a range of savings right across the board.
You've had a fairly clear request from New Zealand Post for more capital for Kiwibank. What's your attitude to that? Would you be prepared to put some of the proceeds from partial asset sales into that?
Well, New Zealand Post has spent the last 18 months having a pretty hard look at both New Zealand Post and Kiwibank and what their future is, and they're putting some propositions in front of the government, but we haven't considered them yet.
So are you open to that idea, though, of you diverting some of the proceeds from the asset sales into that?
Well, look, we're the owners of these businesses. The Kiwibank's growing fast, the Post is shrinking, and we need to make sure we can end up with a stable business that's good value for the taxpayer. I wouldn't want to prejudge the decisions.
But when you look at the options, you've ruled out selling shares in Kiwibank. New Zealand Post says it can't stump up the capital, and the Reserve Bank's regulations and other demands on it require it to have more capital. You're the only cab left on the rank, aren't you?
Well, we always were, because we're the 100% owner of them. So they're putting in front of us some propositions, and we need to have a good hard look at them.
Can the money come from anywhere else?
Well, there's not a lot of sources of cash for these things, but I think it's more about trying to find the right balance between Post and Kiwibank, and we'll consider their options.
Is the interest-free nature of student loans safe?
It is, yeah.